Okay, everyone, welcome to the OpenJ9 Helm discussion meeting for the 6th of October. This is a follow-on from the community call where there was some quite extensive discussion of the proposed Helm contributions to the OpenJ9 project, and there seemed to be some really good discussions to be had. So we thought that we'd have a venue which allowed a little bit more time. So I don't have a fixed agenda. I think it was just that there were questions that were still to be discussed and there were some points still to be made. So I guess with that, I'll just sort of throw the floor open. If there's anything that Raghu or Marius you want to say up front, or Dan, if there's additional questions you'd like to pose at this time.
So based on the short explanation I gave on the last community call, I updated the PR, and I think I answered most of Dan's questions, but we will know that I guess once Dan comments. I tried to kind of address all the specific ones that Dan had asked. If there is, I think I see there is some comment by Andrew, I think, which I have not taken note. I will, and we will try to answer them here. So what I was looking to kind of get out of this is if we can get specific concerns, and hopefully I can answer them here. That allows us to move forward either way. Marius is here too. I think he can.
Yeah, let me give you a leading speech. I guess one of the questions was around of the motivation for this work. So why are we doing this? The purpose of the code. And I would say that the purpose is to make the JITServer technology easier to be discovered and easier to be consumed. And why do I say easier? Well, I was reading this Knative cookbook book, and there's a statement here, and I'm quoting, to make a simple service deployment with Kubernetes, a developer has to write a minimum of 2 YAML files. The complexity makes an application developer spend more time crafting the YAML files rather than focusing on the business need. So I guess that's our motivation. So Knative tries to provide a simpler deployment model, and for us, by providing the help charts, we simplify the job of a person wanting to deploy his application in Kubernetes with the JITServer. Now, it's true that the ideal solution would be to have JITServer in a catalog of services that you can pick from. But the next best thing is to have this help chart in OpenJ9. That was my speech.
So I'm really glad to hear the purpose you're highlighting there, because I think that's the goal that all of us share, right? We want to make it easy to discover and consume JITServer. We want to make it easy to use this technology. A lot of the questions I've been asking in the issue and in various discussions have centered around how users actually use this and how this makes their lives simpler for getting started with JITServer, especially as we look at deployments that are going to be longer lived, right? The simple use case of I'm putting up a toy application to connect to a JITServer is, pretty easy to talk about because there's no life cycle to it. You throw it up, you play around with it, and you shut it down. A lot of my questions have centered on things that have a longer life cycle, right? So I had asked on the call about whether the JITServer and the application had to be running exactly the same version of the JDK. And I believe the answer on the community call was yes. Can I get confirmation on that?
Again, I don't think it was exact version of the JDK. It has to be the same version of the JITServer technology. So at some point we may advance, we're not at that point yet, but at some point we may advance the code OpenJ9, but the JITServer technology could stay at the same version. So in that case, you could have conceivably two OpenJ9 versions connecting to each other through JITServer and having no problem whatsoever. We are not at that stage yet because we are continuously making updates to the JITServer technology, and therefore the JITServer technology increases, I shouldn't say rapidly, but definitely a few times per release cycle.
Okay, so theoretically down the line, it's possible, but today practically it's not.
Correct.
Okay. So then I guess the thing I'm wondering about with this setup is how much does this actually save the user when they have to go to do an update on their application, right? They've deployed their pod, it talks to a JITServer, and then it's time to update their application. So they've updated their application to use a new JDK. They've put it through whatever testing they have. They put it through their deployment pipeline, and they've started to shift load over from the old version of the application to the new version of the application. What happens for them in terms of JITServer?
Yeah, you'd have to have, I guess, different JITServers for the different versions if you want to keep that model where old applications can coexist with the new applications. And you have to change the address or the endpoint that the new application is going to connect to. So you know that I have two JITServers, one that is newer, and I have my new application. Now I have to change the endpoint for the new application to match the newer version of JITServer. But it's possible that different versions of JITServer could coexist in Kubernetes environment.
Okay, so the user would have to rerun this Helm chart specifying a new service name and a new base JDK for it?
Yeah.
Yes. And he can keep the old one or remove the old one depending on whether they're using the old version of the JITServer or not, which are already documented as to how to remove a JITServer, to install a JITServer. If the question is as to this scenario needs to be documented, that makes sense. How do they update? This becomes a matter of documentation, specifically following things that we already documented, that is installing JITServer and uninstalling JITServer, which is already documented. But the scenario could be documented, if that's what you're...
I'm worried more about the model and making sure that we're clear on what the model is right now. We can talk about the actions that need to come out of it. All right, so you've done this deployment. You've deployed the new application. You're switching load from the old version to the new version. You've deployed the new version of JITServer. Eventually, Kubernetes knows to shut down the old version when you've stopped, running enough load through it that you've actually drained all the old version and you're happy on the new one. What mechanism do you do for doing that with the JITServer itself?
I think, Dan, what you're referring to is a day two operations, which is usually done which is a little more advanced stuff. Number one. Number two is it's usually done as part of the pipeline, and its configuration is usually done as part of the production pipeline, and not per se a Helm charts forte. Helm chart just deploys things and makes it easy to deploy things. Operators do the update part is part of the operators. It's capabilities. So this is a Helm chart which only does day one operations. So if we need day two operations, we have to look at operators. That's number one. Number two, even in operators, we could have day two the update support, but we don't have to do the update support as part of the first delivery. Could we do it? I think have to go step by step. Let's get the first one right. The use case of just deploying something using operator, is it working or not? And then add these features such as day two support, and various scenarios that come with it. That's what I think. But if you're looking at Helm chart is for deploying applications, and it does not support a day to operate.
So
I think
sorry, go ahead, Dan. I'll comment on it.
I was going to say, I think the point I'm trying to get at is the Helm chart we're producing is good for the initial install, but that initial install is more complicated than we expose in that chart, in that the JDK has to match, and that you have to rerun that initial install every time the JDK changes.
Yeah, but that's let's say a couple of commands, and if somebody has to update it, they have to update it if we want to use Helm chart. If we don't want to use Helm chart, so the question basically becomes, if you want data support, do you want to use Helm chart or not? Then Helm chart is used is its reach is wide, and it's an easy to use mechanism for Kubernetes in general. It works on OpenShift. It works on it works on Google Anthos, for example. Any version of Kubernetes that's out there, the Helm chart will work, and that's why it has a wide applicability, and that's why a Helm chart is a very easy and good way to do. And there are Helm repositories, of course, as Marius also mentioned.
Raghu, I understand how a Helm chart works. I don't want to get bogged down in the details of how a Helm chart works or how many repos there are there. What I really want to have coming out of this meeting is a clear understanding of the model that we are working towards for the user and the user's experience. I think that is the key piece that is missing in these discussions, is talking about how this works for the user and what their experience becomes.
What is the specific one you are looking at? I don't know, but it certainly looked like you did not know that Helm chart doesn't support data operations. So that's what I was trying to explain to you. Number one. Number two. The user experience that we are trying to look at through Helm chart. So there is an operator coming as well. Through Helm chart is a deployment of JITServer and an application being able to use it. And we can document, as you said, I agree with that. So if there is a scenario how to update, for example, an application with this Helm charts. It's a matter of documentation. We can document. So there are different scenarios. This may not be just the only scenario. We can document them, and which scenario applies to which customers is hard. And again, when we document, we'll only be able to give an example because we don't know what kind of setup customers usually have. Customers might be doing this through their own pipeline, or they could be just doing it manually. So we can give an example to give an idea what the customer needs to do, and they'll be able to do this. So we can document this. So we already document, for example, how the end-to-end JITServer and an application use it can be done. That's already documented. So they need to first deploy the JITServer and then enable the JITServer through a particular command. An example command is given, so they can change it based on what particular kind of setup they are in. And we can add another scenario about how to update your application when the JDK version changes, for example. So these are the two things we can add, and that's the experience that we're looking at through Helm chart. And when we get to the operator, there is a day to support, and we can look at the scenarios and document them and how that can be done.
Raghu, do you have a model worked out for how you see the overall flow of this working? I understand the way Helm charts work. I understand day two operations through operators. What I haven't seen yet is the overall story or the overall picture that talks about what the experience is like for users using JITServer and using these, and how deployments actually work for them. Right?
I think I have explained this multiple times. I still don't understand what you're looking for, Dan, because I think we kind of explained that multiple times. This is as simple as the experience is very simple. They have their applications running on Kubernetes. They have to be, customers have to have their applications on Kubernetes, and this is documented. And we just we deploy the JITServer, and they enable JITServer for their application through every deployment of their application. That's the end-to-end scenario. And how exactly they do it for their application is it is their production environment, so it depends on their production environment. But we give a couple of examples on how that can be done, assuming a particular kind of setup, assuming that they have a Helm chart. We can tell them how they have to do, and we have a documentation for that, how they can redeploy their application to enable JITServer. And that's it. And Helm chart has a limited, it has a structure that tells us how you deploy things. We can add some more, clarifications in the documentation, but I need to know what more you're looking for through this.
Raghu, I feel a bit like we're talking past each other.
Marius, do you understand what Dan is trying to ask and what we need to provide? Because I feel we have provided that information.
I cannot grasp the details of the discussion because, at least from my point of view, I have only theoretical experience with Kubernetes and very little and no practical experience whatsoever. So it's hard to me to come up with a scenario or even to guess what the user questions or problems are going to be in practice.
Andrew,
So I can only make assumptions, guesses, but no more than that.
Andrew, if you have a perspective from Dan or any understanding what is missing, so I need to kind of clearly know what is missing so I can provide that. I'm really trying to do that.
Well, I think I can't profess to speak for Dan, right? Dan has his own specific concerns. I think that from my perspective and kind of what I'm hearing in the discussion is that you, Raghu, are viewing the Helm chart and the contribution as kind of just a base piece of sort of technology or a base piece of implementation where you're basically saying, well, you can use this to deploy a server, and we're going to kind of leave you to your own devices to figure out how to fit it into what you're doing and what the overall story is.
Can I correct that a little bit?
Okay.
It's not as if we are leaving the customer as such. We are giving them examples on how they can update their application to use JITServer.
Right. Okay. So, but right, you have examples, but the core piece of YAML and other associated stuff that actually is the Helm chart is really a very basic sort of piece of technology, in that what it will do is bring up whatever the container is that's going to run the JITServer and expose it based on whatever the configuration is, and you provide some documentation to tell people how to be able to connect to it and use it with their application. Correct?
That's what a Helm chart is meant to do. It's nothing more than that. It's to help deploy things. That's all. It's like an install for this.
Yeah. So it's a very sort of basic, fundamental kind of enabling technology. And Dan, you can try to correct me if I've misunderstood your point, but I think you might be kind of like, Raghu is seeing this as, I guess, as one sort of small piece of the puzzle, an initial part, and that there's other things to add around it. And maybe I'm understanding you as wanting to have an idea of the bigger picture before we start putting in the pieces that make up that picture. Is that more fair?
Yeah.
in characterizing your concern?
I would like to see a larger story and the larger roadmap around how deployments work for users. I understand, as we've all said, Helm is about deployments. But I think for the technology to be successful, which is our end goal here, we have to make it easier for users to know what they're doing and how they're using this. A story that says, here's how you deploy it and connect to it isn't a full story.
Right, right. So I think that the issue, perhaps, and maybe you guys can comment on this, but it sounds to me like Dan is looking for sort of the big picture design and possibly the different components that may be contributed right now or at some point in the not too distant future that will make up kind of what the final picture would look like for OpenJ9 using these technologies, so that we can understand where we're going, with a view that we understand that the Helm chart is kind of step 0 or step 1 on that process, and that initially it will require documentation to provide, how to consume it, but with a view that other things are going to be built out, right? Like, so you were alluding to and have a PR open about an operator. And I think it's just that bigger picture that Dan is asking for, so that the project understands kind of how this all builds out. Because I think there is a concern that if we publish the Helm chart and we don't have a way that we can make it easy for people to do updates and get security fixes and sort out these versioning issues and things, people may have a negative experience because they end up fighting some of these technical details, which are valid technical issues, and that Helm charts are not meant to fix, but that we want to try and have that pathway established ahead of starting on the journey, just to understand how it's going to, or what the vision for how it's going to work is. Does that maybe make sense, Dan? Is that kind of fair for what you're looking for? Or did I paraphrase?
Yeah, I think that's an accurate piece. Is we need enough of the full story to know that this is a right step, and to help users with actually doing that deployment and understanding what they've deployed.
Right, and to be clear, the request is not for all of the parts. Is not for all of the parts to be opened as PRs or contributed right now, or even fully implemented right now, but that there is a vision for how the parts fit together that Dan and others can kind of buy into, so that we can see the path and understand how it fits in.
I will let Marius comment on where he thinks we are on the JITServer technology side, and what makes sense to add. So if I gather it right, we need a documentation. Do you say that the documentation in the PR or in the issue, or is it should be part of the Helm chart documentation?
Well, so I think that I would say that the precedent for this kind of request is whenever somebody is going to contribute a major new feature to the JVM, since most of the precedents that we have are contributions to the JVM, right? So we've had contributions for things like concurrent scavenging to the JVM. We've had contribution of JITServer. We've got the snapshot project that's kind of ongoing at the moment, right? Where there's been an issue opened and there's a high level vision of where we're going to get, and some steps that are going to be taken to achieve that, right? Which are kind of the intermediate milestones. And the project kind of says, yeah, we like where that's going. And then we work on the specific contributions that are going to fit into that vision. And if the vision has to change, that's fine. But it's done in the issue and discussed before we worry about the technical content of the PRs. Otherwise, the two things tend to get munged together. Is kind of how the community normally works these kinds of larger contribution issues. So
I think then the place is actually the issue that.
yeah, I think so. And it's just it's not that we want like reams and reams of essays. I think it's just that what Dan would be looking for, and he can interject once I finish this if I've gotten it wrong, but I think it would be kind of what is the like yes, the details of the day 2 operations and all this kind of stuff are going to come after because we have to worry about operators and all the other gorp that goes along with that. But what is the end vision for how it would work in this kind of environment? And what are the parts to achieve that, right? And like break that down just as like a bulleted list of, well, we need the Helm chart and we're going to need an operator, and initially it'll do this or it'll do that, and we'll add this, or right, just so that there's a vision for how this all fits together. And then we can make sure that the part that you're contributing right now fits that story and we understand where we're going. And if people start consuming the Helm chart and are asking us about that vision, then we have the vision and we can point them at the issue.
Can we call this like the user experience roadmap? Is that
exactly? And I think that's what Dan was driving at when he was talking about the users. I think it's the user experience plan for this.
Okay, so I think I can draft one and put one up to kind of explain what the steps we are going to be taking. But some of them I wasn't sure because we are still working on it in the for the JITServer. We are working, for example, on the performance and scaling aspects of it. Should we talk about that as well, or should we wait until we have a JITServer itself has a story for that, or has some results for that?
Well, I think that we should try and keep it separate as much as we can from sort of the internal technical details of the JITServer. Like we should focus on the user experience, and I think that we would like to see the scalability and the everything and the performance of the JITServer increase, and there are people working on that. So I guess kind of what is the vision, assuming that pans out, and if you have an idea of how that plan would change if it didn't pan out, then you could also suggest that. But I wouldn't be pessimistic and suggest that the members of the community that are working to improve the JITServer will not be successful in their endeavors, right? It's just probably a spectrum of success. How far can they push it? So I wouldn't worry too much about that, the details of the JITServer itself. Let's focus on the user experience of Helm and Kubernetes and all of the bits that sort of fit together for that.
Yeah, I agree, because the usage model should be loosely coupled to the technical aspects of the JITServer. So talking about performance improves all the time. So we shouldn't necessarily tie the usage model to a particular point in time regarding performance.
Yeah, I think just the capabilities, I guess, tied to when the capability is ready, I guess. That makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. If we are able to achieve scaling, how does this allow people to consume that in a nice, easy to use way? How does it address some of the concerns about managing things when you are scaling, right, and really utilizing the potential of the JITServer? I do want to pause there, and I would like to just ask Dan to interject if anything I have said is not in agreement with the kinds of things that he's looking to get comments on.
No, that's you've paraphrased me well, Andrew. I'm glad that the message is getting across clearly. I think that user experience is key to this technology being successful, and the more we can communicate that and the path that we're taking to provide that, the better off we're going to be for being able to get people to use JITServer, and for the community to be able to understand the path that we're on with these pull requests.
I will try to put a draft of the roadmap and see if it makes sense, and we go from there. So the discussion actually moves to the original 9443 issue, and I will be updating hopefully in a couple of days a roadmap, and hopefully that addresses the concerns. If not, I think we may have to get to one more time and see what more information is needed there.
Keith, did you have something that you wanted to add? I saw that you were trying to talk at one point there. I'll let you interject now.
No, I didn't have anything to say. I didn't even realize I wasn't on mute. So,
Oh, okay.
good.
Not to worry. I just thought you were having trouble getting a word in edgeways in the discussion, so I wanted to make sure you had a chance to comment. Oh,
Sometimes
yeah.
that happens.
Andrew. I was just going to say that the thing you've been describing is, if I can throw in an agile term, it's a user story, right? That idea of what the user experience is going to be at the end of the thing you've built. That's kind of what the user story is supposed to capture.
I think the user story has been put together and has changed based on what we use, because user story is sort of coupled tightly with the customer's own production environments. So we have to be sort of general in terms of how we describe this. So that's why we have gotten to this. For example, when we're looking at Rhapsody, we could tell a very exact end-to-end story of how this would look like. But with a general customer's production environment, we have to tell a general story, and this is what needs to be done, and how we do it is specific to the customer's production environment. But I think what is being looked at, from my understanding, is a roadmap of what are the different things we are going to deliver, and how how they are going to come in, maybe a rough idea of the batches of them. But also with the how that will improve the user experience at various stages. I think it is all there. We have an operator, and we have the operator we have does not support the day two operations yet, but we have, because it's still based on internally based on Helm. We need to work on that. But I will write that step by step, so I think people get an idea how that is going to improve going forward. And Knative support, for example, can help with the scaling for JITServer. That story, I think I can put in, and probably people can get an idea of where that will lead us to. But parallelly, we have the performance and scaling JITServer work ongoing. So hopefully that matches the this part of the work.
Okay. Right. Yeah. So I think it's that end-to-end story, and I certainly agree there are pieces of that have come out. I think it's just getting it together in one place and articulating it so that everybody can agree on what that user story is going to be. And if you're looking at supporting particular environments because they're interesting to you or to the company that you're working with, if that's something that you're going to be doing, then certainly call that out. And if it's just the general support that you're going to be contributing, that's fine too. And if you just kind of sketch what that user story is and which bits they'll have to customize for their environment, and where opportunities would be to support that, because even if you don't want to say do something for Athos or whatever environment, right? It's not of interest to you to do that development work. If there's a picture of what the overall story looks like, other people may become interested in contributing some of those parts. So having the vision will make it easier for people who are interested in this kind of stuff to become involved if they so choose, right? And having that makes it easier for you as well, because there could be other people that could eventually become interested in contributing.
Yeah, makes sense. We actually, in fact, had personas-based user story for some of the initial Helm work that we did. I can also share that in the community.
Okay, I think that would probably help Dan and others understand some of those visions, so that we have that sort of more clear. And I think understanding the deliverables is important, so that we can, as I raised on the call, OpenJ9 currently has a charter as a source-only project. So if there are aspects of this that may start to edge towards not something that is not source only, then Dan or one of the other community leaders will need to discuss that with Eclipse to make sure that we stay within the charter that we have for the project. And having the vision will help to ensure that those discussions happen ahead of the point where somebody has actually gone to the effort of building the code and is trying to contribute it. Because I would hate to have to turn around and say, well, no, we can't actually take that because it doesn't fit with how the project is supposed to be governed based on our mandate from the Eclipse Foundation. So I think that will help with that as well.
So far, I think all we have is YAML files and source in that sense, and no dependencies included as part of the PR.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that we can probably work our way through it. I think it's just having it called out and having it clear how those bits are going to work will help with that vision to make sure that Dan and any other committers that are involved in reviewing the work are comfortable that the work is within the charter of the project. Since that's one of our key mandates as committers, is to ensure that we remain within that mandate and are supporting and encouraging and that mandate as we go forward. Okay.
So
all right.
One example of just of an area that has been successful for OpenJ9 in terms of the user experience is shared classes. So it might be worth looking into how shared classes works a little bit to see some of the decisions that were made there to make that really successful and easy for users to use. It's little things like it's a single command line option that turned it on. It's how shared classes handles old and stale caches automatically for you. It's the ease of deployment and use. There's a number of things that were done to make it really easy to use, to deploy, and to be successful without requiring a whole lot of configuration and mental space from the users, or worrying about remembering to do this afterwards when they updated or things like that. So getting some of those stories really fleshed out around the use, the update, the removal, those pieces will be key to making the user experience story work.
And to be clear, it's not mandated that they are all there from day one. It's just the vision of how it will look and how to get there.
Yes.
Because shared classes certainly started off life with a fair number of warts and a fair number of things, and we learned a lot from users as well as they were using it that helped to improve that user story. So it was a learning experience for us as well, I think, on that journey. Okay.
And the one other area that has been raised in the pull requests has been around the licensing. And questions around the generator used and the licenses of that and the output. I'm happy to just handle that in the issue if you prefer, but we do need clear answers around the licenses being used and being that the contribution is being provided under.
It's the Helm tool, which is which I will update again. I think there is a to-do on that one, on license. In the new patch that we will make, I will have an explanation, and then the patch will come, I think, clarifying some of the license items. We know that the Helm tool is generating a template, and then we update it to work for us. And we run a lint whatnot to make sure that we are putting in some of the best practices for Helm. So before the patch goes out, of course, I will provide those information.
Okay, yeah, that would be super helpful so that we can review the Helm license and the license associated with the templates to see what is going to be compatible for contribution, because obviously our charter would say that we would want contributions under the standard license for the project. If that's not possible, then we need to be able to articulate why, and it will likely require a discussion with Eclipse before we can accept something that is not under that license. Is that fair, Dan?
Yes.
So, just the transparency on the tool and who did what. That you did all the work apart from modifying the template, and then we can just verify the license of the that Helm is under, and that the restrictions that imposes on the generated templates to ensure it would be consistent with a contribution under the project license, assuming you're not going to propose a different license. And I know there was some discussion about repository and things like that, but I think a lot of that is just sort of operational details that we'll take care of once the vision is clear and we have the parts sort of, and we have some idea of the scale and kind of how it's all going to fit together with the JVM as to whether it lives in the main OpenJ9 repo or if we need to create a repository to manage this stuff sort of independently of the mainline project. But I think that's a discussion to be had once we're more comfortable with the PR being ready to go. Okay. Not hearing a lot more comments. Are there any other points that anybody would like to raise at this time, or other concerns? Okay. Well, I guess then what we'll do is we'll wrap well, before we wrap it up, I guess I guess what the next step would be is that there'll be some updates and some comments. Do people feel we should have a follow-up to this call, or would we like to just have an update on the community call? And if we need more time at that point, I can arrange another one of these meetings. I'd like to hear people's opinion on that, on how to proceed.
We'll probably need another meeting like this because we are going to hold up the committee meeting for a long time, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think maybe next week, and by that week, I'll try to put something in, and fully, we would have some opinions to that as well, and then we can discuss here. So what need to be added or need to be clarified, so that would be.
Okay, so I know that a lot of us that are on this call are based in Canada, so it'll be a long weekend this weekend since it's Thanksgiving here in Canada. That would mean that we have basically 3.5 or so working days, less whatever time you have today. If we were to look at 1 week, so is 1 week too soon? Should we just book it for 2 weeks and we'll follow up then? Or do people feel that next week would be appropriate?
I think we probably need to see the user experience information and have some time to look at it and think through it before we have another meeting. So next week may be too soon, depending on how quickly Raghu and company can pull that together.
Okay. How about I propose then what I do is I will book a definite meeting for 2 weeks from today. And if it looks like there's a lot of information that appears in the issue and we are ready to have a discussion next week, I can book a meeting then, and we can always cancel the one in 2 weeks. But I will book one in 2 weeks right now, just because I'm worried it isn't going to be enough time for people to digest it properly before we have a discussion. And hopefully we could just use this venue rather than some really long discussions on the issue. And I can make sure that I do a recording of the next meeting to post to the OpenJ9 YouTube channel as well, so that people can follow along. Does that sound reasonable to everybody? Stunned silence will imply acceptance, so.
Sounds good.
Okay. All right. The silence has voted. Excellent. Great. Well, thank you everybody for your participation today. I think this has really helped a lot of get everybody on the same page. It is exciting to see this stuff going into the project. It is exciting to see a pathway to making JITServer more consumable. And I think that the project overall is very behind that goal. So I think it's just making sure that we all agree on how we're going to get there. So I think this is just a natural part of the evolution to getting the PRs in. So thank you for your patience, Raghu and Marius, and thank you for indulging us with the discussion. I think it's helped clarify things a lot. So I will book a meeting for 2 weeks from today, and I will post the recording at the end of the call. So if there's no further discussion, then I will end the call now. Stop the recording and we'll end the call.
Thank you, Dan and Andrew, for this. I think a couple of these probably will allow us to move forward. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. I will now stop the recording. The meeting is closed, and we will continue in 2 weeks. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.